downhill and straight. So far so good.
Sounds great.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the May 7 work session. I'd like to call the meeting to order as it's the appointed hour of 7 o'clock. And thank you all for Zooming. I just have to share that from our meeting on Tuesday, trying to follow the numbers that Jake and Gary put together, I found challenging. And I'm thankful for the work that they did with Janie and to get all the information to us last night, and then I think an updated version this afternoon. But look forward to going through the numbers, and we'll look forward to exercising great minds. I'd like to open the meeting with a thought for the day, quote from Admiral Hyman Rickover, father of America's nuclear navy. Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. And I'm grateful for your great mind as we embrace the idea of a balanced budget and working through a document. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim to advance the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. We had, as you said, a few very minor changes. And Gary, would you like to go over those changes very quickly, just so council understands the very few small changes made since Tuesday?
I can do that, Jim. The only change that I'm aware of, Tuesday, when we looked at the numbers for the indoor pool, those numbers reflected full funding of $15,000. Coming out that meeting, having the impression that they were only expecting 90% funding. The latest iteration has funding of $13,500. I believe that's the only change that I'm aware of subsequent to Tuesday's meeting.
Weren't there a couple of formula errors too that you and Jake had to change?
I'm going to defer to Jake. He's the one that circulated all the numbers on Tuesday, as well as the numbers that we're looking at tonight. So I'll defer to him.
Yes, thank you, Gary. The only other change was going ahead and adding the anticipated $282,000 carryover from FY20 to the budget to get us out of an overall deficit in the general fund. And then additionally, the latest update this morning was just to correct a percentage change formula error on one of the, I believe, the general fund summary page, but it was nothing relating to the actual figures that you saw on the page.
Just wanted to be sure council understood there. If you saw those things, we did spot them and make those changes. They were minor and not consequential to the budget itself. I guess now, you know, Jake, Gary, and myself are here to spend time with you and answer your questions. I know that this format virtually is a struggle for all of us to a certain extent. And I also understand that having the budget itself electronically in front of us is sometimes a struggle, because most of us, myself included, are used to holding something in our hands and spreading it out in front of us and making notes on it. So Jake, Gary, and I believe we have a budget that represents the best we could do to try and continue to operate the city and put our priorities where they belong in providing service to the public, to the residents of our community. We don't have all the resources we'd like at this time. We think we put together a fairly conservative and yet realistic picture of the resources, the funding that we'll have this coming year. But to be quite honest, it could get worse. Now it could get better as well, sometime in September, October, November. So what I think we have tonight to look at, and if you would approve it early or later in the evening, is the best we can put together at this juncture. And it's going to be something that will obviously have to perhaps be adapted as the conditions because of COVID-19 continue to change, and or the economic conditions as a result of COVID-19 may change. So again, I think questions from you are probably in order at this time, whatever you have for the next 50 minutes or 55 minutes.
Or 5. Before I start taking questions, just want to make perhaps 2 observations. One, there was a question of why do we need to approve this before May 15th? And Jared was good enough to provide the statute that says that we'll adopt our budget no later than May 15th or 30 days from the last communication of regarding state funds. And in conversation with Jared, May 1st, we learned about CARES Act money that's coming to the state, which obviously modified their budget. So arguably, we have the latitude, if we want, to extend from May 1st to May 31st. And I see Rebecca wants to make a statement on that, and I'll yield in just a second. We can still move forward tonight if everyone's comfortable, but we do have some latitude there, and we'll hash that out as we get to the end of this meeting. The other piece that I would offer, and this is my personal opinion, when we were talking, Dennis was at the last meeting on Tuesday advocating for the agency funding and not to remove that. And it referenced letters from the city going out, or someone referenced letters from the city going out that they were going to be reduced 10%. Personally, I feel if we've sent a letter out saying we're going to cut you 10%, that we should honor that and find the money, whether it's fund balance or tweak in revenues or whatever, to fulfill what we've put in writing to people. I also would charge council with considering directing the city manager over the course of the next year as we look at the budget for 2022 to go out and meet with these agencies and see what they're feeling, or not their feeling, what it would take to get to eliminate their funding. When we look at why we're funding some of these, one I can recall with Yellow Brick Road was when we had a child care crisis, and Yellow Brick Road was the only deal in town providing infant care for residents in our community. My recollection is that we funded about $10,000 to help Yellow Brick Road provide that service for that year. And we've inched it back over the past 15 years to where it's $1,000 specific to scholarships for residents of the city of Lexington. I don't think they're reliant on our contribution, and us not contributing to their annual fund or their operations is not an indictment of the great work that they provide. It's not a government function, as it were. So something I would encourage council to think about, directing the city manager to go, and sorry to pick on Yellow Brick Road. Another example is the Rockbridge Area Occupational Center, which we funded pretty substantially a couple years as they were in financial strife because of the great work that they did and the folks that they employed at that organization. Because of the workload and some other regulatory issues, they ended up disbanding, and they're no longer on our list. And so I encourage council to think about that. Rebecca, please chime in on your perspective on the May 15th. Looks like you may be muted. There you go.
Are you all able to hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear. Welcome, Rebecca. Well, I did hear you.
You can hear me?
I can. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry. I did want to take a moment and just respond. I was able to read this last email correspondence between Jim and Mayor Friedman and Mr. Jenkins. And while I'm certainly not an attorney by any means, I do think there's some misinterpretation on that interpretation of the release of our estimate of state funds and the connection to the Federal CARES Act funding. When I'm looking at this and the information that I have received, this Federal CARES Act is federal funding that is a one-time federal paid amount. It's basically like a stimulus check that is not in our budget. It's not reflected in our budget, and it's not to be included in our budget. It is intended to be used for incurred expenses or support of expenses that need to address educational needs or continued technology needs to be able to respond to the COVID-19 effect on our school system. I'm not sure that I would consider, actually I would not consider the CARES Act funding that was released from the state superintendent on May 1st as an estimate of state funds. If anything, beyond that May 15th expected deadline according to our code, you might be able to consider the April 22nd amended budget by the governor, which did amend the state funds. So if you're considering an extension beyond that May 15th Code of Virginia expectation, I would think the furthest you could go out beyond that in order for us to be in compliance with what's expected on the school's budget could be May 22nd, which would be the 30 days out from that last governor's amended state funding. Again, the CARES Act funding is not state funding. That is federal funding that's released as a one-time payment based on Title I numbers from the state.
Fair enough. We'd be compliant either way, but certainly as long as if we pushed it to the 21st meeting.
I believe so. And going back and looking at that, that would be the only adjustment we've never had to worry about that 30-day question that you had there, Frank, or Mayor Freeman, a little while ago, the 30 days to approve beyond that estimate of state funds. But if you're going to go in that route, I think you would only be able to look at that April 22nd amended budget from the governor.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, thank you. Yeah, we're in uncharted territories with many of the things we're dealing with, and hope that we can come to a conclusion or consensus and approval tonight. But wanted to alert council that depending upon how our discussion goes, we have that latitude.
Absolutely. And I apologize for being last minute asking to speak on that, but I just wanted to clarify that from at least our interpretation on this end. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Certainly. Glad to have you anytime, and you can call me Frank anytime as well, but thank you.
Thank you.
With that backdrop and information, to members of council, what questions do you have regarding the numbers or tweaks or changes that you might want to solicit your friends or colleagues to support?
Not really a change, just a question. So on one of the things we've eliminated was a contingency amount of 35,000. So just there is no contingencies built into the budget, basically, just so we're all clear on that.
That is correct. We don't have any leniency at all. Whatever is in that budget or in this budget, line by line, is what we have, no more.
Okay. And I guess getting back to Frank's comment, so was there, I remember it being stated last time, but so were all the agencies notified that we hadn't passed the budget yet, but what was the notification made to the agencies, I guess?
Let me read it to you. I basically sent to all the agencies a letter that said your organization requested funds in the amount of in FY21. I'm recommending partial funding for your agency and the city manager's proposed FY21 budget. Due to the resulting serious revenue challenges that seem certain in the future, I'm recommending reductions in funding for all discretionary agencies of 10%. The city council will consider the proposed budget over the next several weeks before adopting the budget in May.
Oh, okay. So just that you're recommending.
Right, just recommending at that time.
Okay.
Leslie, how do you respond to my recommendation that we should fund the agencies or find a way to fund the agencies this year?
I know, I struggle with that. I obviously from last meeting, I struggle with that question. I don't like this overall process. Gary sent a memo earlier making some suggestions. If there's time, I'd like to talk about that because it needs to change. But you know, you hate to cut the agencies when in some ways they're needed most, but I still think we need to prepare everyone for the worst, and we will monitor and we can make changes as we go. I have not received any feedback from anyone. Granted, it's only been 2 days since we made that announcement that people need that funding, but
Yeah. My logic and lobby for it is if we hadn't set and this is, if a letter had not been sent shaping expectations for 90%,
yeah.
I would be more comfortable saying, sorry, we just can't handle it, we've eliminated. But I feel like we've made somewhat of a commitment with the city manager's recommendation. And I feel very confident that, or I feel it responsible to give notice here a year out saying, we want to focus on taxes being for the core functions of the city government.
Yeah.
Not, no indictment on any of the organizations and what the good things that they do. And I think that addresses some of the concerns that Gary referenced in his memo that you referenced.
Yeah. Well, when I went back and looked, I'm sure we've all had a chance to look at what agencies would be cut. I mean, RATS would be cut $8,000, which I imagine from their budget's pretty substantial. The housing development would be cut. Housing Authority would be cut $12,000, which again, I think that's pretty substantial. Some of the smaller ones, Habitat, Project Horizon, Yellow Brick Road, all fantastic agencies, but they are less than $2,000, most of them around $1,000. For them, I don't think it would matter. But those bigger ones, I worry about.
Right. How do you feel about the idea of funding this year at the 90% and directing the city manager to, if you will, negotiate or discuss an exit?
I could work with that. I'd be interested in what everybody else has to say.
Well, on Tuesday, I made a suggestion for the city manager to approach the agencies and see how flexible or maybe needy they are for the funding that we've already set aside and what they can live with or what they can live without. I think there's an opportunity to help the agencies that really do need the help and give the city the opportunity to cut some funding from our budget that could be possibly cut based on the feedback from the agencies that were discussed.
I appreciate your optimism, but I haven't found too many organizations that say we really don't need your money.
Well, I haven't heard any feedback at all from any conversations that our city managers had with the agencies that we're talking about.
Certainly.
Well,
Well, I don't want to add any more workload to Jim's load as far as, that's my one concern with that suggestion, unless we just pick the big ones.
Well,
Well, I have to-
what's the criteria we're using based on that?
I'll let Jim talk. He was going to say something.
I'll just reference that because of the timing that we're looking at with potential adoption tonight, it doesn't give the city manager much time to solicit feedback from these folks. That's why I suggest the idea of doing the 90% funding that's somewhat been acknowledged and working towards in the coming year with what you're talking about, Chuck. It gives a little bit more time to grease the skids and get it accomplished, as opposed to this budget in the next either couple hours or 2 weeks. Jim, you wanted to make a statement?
I was just going to note, I did not have time to check with all the agencies by any means. I did check with a couple, and several of them shook their heads and said they probably could do without it. It's a few $1,000s in the case of several of the smaller agencies. Now, I did not speak with RATS, who somebody mentioned there's $8,000. That's my old Stanton days there when I dealt with cats. And some of the other larger agencies, probably it makes more of a difference. But I did not reach out to everyone. I just didn't take the opportunity over the last day and a half to do that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you took the initiative and did reach some of the agencies that we're talking about and getting some feedback. So that's helpful. So I guess there is a possibility there.
Other council members want to weigh in?
I just want to add that for the public's sake, if they're listening in, I do have to recuse myself because I'm associated with one, actually more than one of those agencies at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander.
I as well, because I'm associated with Rockbridge Area Health Center.
David, you have any feedback on?
We're the city council and we have to make the hard decisions. And I'm not, for one, going to feel that Jim that sent a letter, whether it was a month ago, boxed me into making a decision that might not be right for the citizens of Lexington and the budget or city staff. So I, you know, his initial proposal also said staff would receive raises. His initial proposal also said that we would fund some capital improvements. His initial proposal also said we'd have a downtown enhancement fund. His initial proposal also said we'd council contingency. I'm reluctant to say, I mean, I'm not going to make any friends in the community. We all are connected. I mean, I know some have to recuse themselves from this discussion, but we all are associated in one way or the other with folks that are involved with these agencies. But I just have a hard time if that's our rationale, that Jim sent a letter when we didn't yet know the magnitude of COVID-19. If you remember, the initial budget had a lot of our revenue streams looking a lot better. So there was a lot in the previous budget. So, you know, hey, if there's more money, if you're going to tell Jim to find money to give away, let's find money for council contingency or for let's put the raises back in. I'm just one to, as long as the word staff furlough is a consideration for the second half of FY21, I have a hard time committing to things that are not taking care of the core functions of city government.
Thank you, David. Dennis, I don't want to not give you an opportunity to weigh in.
Well, a couple things. I'm, you know, I do have a sister who is employed by the indoor pool, although because of the joint agreement with Rockridge County creating that indoor pool, they're not technically included in the discretionary agencies, but I mean, I'll mention them. I agree with Frank. I think that we probably this year should honor, even though you're right, it's not a firm or legal commitment. I think this is the year to be as supportive as we can to these outside agencies. I am totally on board though with you know, Frank's recommendation and what Gary suggested as to next year maybe doing it a little bit differently and coming up with a pot. And then, but I think this year I feel as though this is the year we should be trying to be supportive of our outside agencies that are in many cases doing governmental work on some level for us. You know, they're assisting the poor, they're helping the, I mean, so for me personally, I would feel better with Frank's approach here and fund these outside agencies this year and then come up with a better way to do it next year.
And of course, again, not wanting to be tarred and feathered in the community, I can't believe I'm taking this position when I don't need to probably, but this will be my, I don't know, 5th or 6th budget. And each of the 6 years we've said, we've funded the outside agencies and we said, next year will be different. Next year will be different. And here we're staring down potentially a $2 million hole in the budget. And for all we know, it could be 3. For all we know, it could be worse. And I'm reluctant to committing to things before any businesses on Main Street have even opened, before the universities have even invited their students back and had one parents' weekend or one home football game, committing to items that we don't need to, that we could wait till the latter half of FY21, when we already know we're going to have to look at this budget quarterly or monthly. And so I would be happy to reconsider the outside agencies after the first quarter, after the second quarter. I'd be happy to do that.
And I think I really looking at these, I think the only 2 that are going to be, that possibly could be hurt are rats in the housing authority, just because the number, which I would assume we could wait till October to, if they came back and said they were in dire straits, but
I was going to suggest to city council that if you were to direct staff, of course, or to put some type of language in the budget that would say these agencies' fundings shall be renewed or reviewed at the end of the first quarter, end of the second quarter, and depending on the revenues and the financial situation at that time, there's an opportunity that the agencies could be funded, or however, whatever language you'd be comfortable with, because nobody wants to say no clearly at this juncture. But with the unknown being what it is, giving them some assurance you would look again, and maybe the assurance that they could have come to a council meeting and say, here is our status today, would allow a very balanced view of not only how much worse it's gotten potentially or better in the economy, but also how the economy's impacted them. There might be another round of federal funding for them.
mm,
I like that. I like Jim's approach. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think we would like to see done with the budget, the latter half of FY21, if our businesses are open and our restaurants are filled. You know, it's continues to be in the back of my mind, staff compensation, and it's in the back of my mind that what we've done to our equipment replacement fund and our, you know, capital improvement plan, that those again are obligations that we have, that we are kicking the can down the road by drastically underfunding them this year in this budget. So we will pay for that in the future.
I don't think we have a consensus for the agencies. The challenge, Jim, I'll let you think about it while we hopefully address some other topics. But when we talk about restoring the funding, if projections, if it's not as bad as we've projected or as bad as it could be, and we have a more favorable circumstance in October, targeting that. Actually, that's a tough time because we've got the 2-month lag for some of the numbers and a 1-month lag. So it's really November, December that we really are looking at the reality of 21. I think we just need to be aware of that if we don't change what's recommended at this point. So before we close the meeting, we'll come back to this and just get a chance to stew on it, because my question would be, if we do want to restore funding, anything including recycling, bring it back on board because things are better than we anticipate. What does it have to look like? Where does it need to be for us to be comfortable restoring or providing funding for some of those? I trust Jim and staff's been thinking about that, and you can share that with us before we conclude. To stray a little bit from agencies for a minute, are there any other topics, concerns, changes, modifications, or just points of order that any council members want to raise?
Just had a question. And this is just whether it's the agencies or whatever, you decide if you're going to restore the funding to back to 90%, or what would you cut then? I mean, are we just going to leave it at a higher deficit, or just no one ever mentioned what would be the next thing then to cut if you were going to either restore recycling or agency funding? I mean, it's just something to think about.
Jim, do you want to respond, or I'm not sure?
Well, from my perspective, if city council were looking at restoring recycling, the outside agencies, and the cost was cutting other services of the city, I would have to recommend against that. I think we've reviewed and carefully looked at what other services and activities are offered by the city, and those are not as high a priority, the ones we've put on the table already. We've added some optional ones in case things get worse, but I wouldn't personally want to recommend to city council that some of the things that are currently not being funded would be traded out, and things that we are recommending for funding would then be taken out of the budget. I just don't see that kind of room or that being a positive outcome for the city in our community at this point. If there was any consideration at all of that nature, say in November, if things didn't get worse, what I would propose is looking at the fund balance. I'd like to think we maintain that fund balance over the next 4 to 6 months to see how bad it might get, because we might have to move into that to fund our necessary activities. And so I'd hate to make a commitment to anything that wasn't, if you will, necessary to governmental functions until we see if it gets worse. If it doesn't get worse, maybe there's an opportunity to bring back some of the funding by using the fund balance, because by then we're assured, or hopefully assured, that there's no more depth to the economic decline, and we've reached a flattening out point or even a slight uptick, and it's safe to look at those reserves for that type of a use.
Yeah, Michelle, if I understood your question regarding the agency funding, if we were to do 90% as I recommended or asked you all to contemplate, it would be either from adjusting the revenues or fund balance, I think, are the only two options for paying for that.
That's just why I wanted to understand what we were all, because at our session 2 days ago, that was one of the cuts. So I guess my question was, if we're going to put it back in, where is it going to go? Where is it coming from? So if you want, if we decide it comes from the fund balance, that's fine, or make it up in the revenue somehow. I'm just curious. That's all.
Correct. Got to find the money somewhere. Yeah, I guess actually the other alternative, is David pointed out previously, is it's about 1% on the tax rate. So you could increase taxes 1%, 1 cent rather, not 1%, but 1 cent, fund balance, or tweak your revenues. Those are your three options, I think, for generating that to cover that expense. Yes.
And just to clarify, I pointed that out. I didn't advocate for that.
Correct.
I know you did. But again, there are some important items that are in budget scenario 1 that we have all swallowed begrudgingly to get to where we are. You know, if you recall, our school board advocated significantly for the SRO position. That has gone away. You know, let's say the kids go to a pool, you know, the community might say in July, where's our swimming pool? You know, there's a lot. And so I would rather, I think Jim has a good approach here, in that he's done exactly what we've asked him to do in a time where none of us know the future. And heck, I think one of the first questions was that we don't have a council contingency. And I feel like, you know, we went through that a year or two ago and we said, we got to have a council contingency. That was really bad, because again, in my 5 or 6 years on council, there's always been unexpected expenses that we need that for. And so if there happens to be funds that we're moving things around, that might be a good place to park money if we had money tonight, which I don't feel that we do, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Mr. Mayor, if I may weigh in on the idea of tax increase, even though that seems like it would be a simple fix, the truth of the matter is council cannot adopt a budget tonight that has some real estate tax increase because we advertised for public hearing, no tax increase. If we were to want to implement a tax increase, it would necessitate proper notice, advertisement, and public hearing to consider such a tax increase.
Thank you for that reminder, Gary. You're exactly right. Members of council have any other items, concerns, questions, curiosities?
You know, I think a couple things, again, are worth noting. I mentioned it at the work session. We know it. I don't think the community knows it, that recycling is going away, that there doesn't appear to be a location for residents that want to hold on to their glass or plastic or paper, that they can take it, is my understanding, that they cannot take it and pay even something to the county dumpsters to, if they feel so inclined to do that. I don't think they're able to do that. You know, I also think that it's worth pointing out that the schools are freezing compensation. There's no step increase. There's no increase for the schools compensation wise. This current budget also has our chief position in the police department vacant for a year. Luckily, we're fortunate with Mark Riley, but that's at some point that can impact the city. I mean, there's a lot of decisions that we're making that I just feel like people are going to realize in about a month what we've done, and I just, you know, want to have it be out in the open. There's a lot in this budget, and I meant to say, Dennis, I think initially the good work that tourism and the board and the brainstorming of the executive director and so forth, I hate to say it, but they got the ball rolling with their creative and generous offer proposal to reduce the locality's contribution for a number of quarters, because that plugged all of the localities whole initially. I mean, that started the ball rolling. And, you know, my short time on tourism, when things get rough, you don't cut tourism, you double down to promote the region. And when the Shenandoah Valley is back open, we're going to want tourism doing their thing and bringing people in when it's safe. And, you know, that's something that we are in this budget reducing our contribution to tourism. So there's a lot of organizations that are pitching in to make this budget happen. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the staff, what they've done. And I appreciate our city employees that are going to, you know, go a year without compensation increases also and serving the public. So I'll get off my soapbox.
I'll pile on. You left out the fire and their $53,000. So everyone making sacrifices to fill the hole that we don't know how large it's going to be. And as we've discussed before, hope and pray that we're incredibly wrong and the virus is stopped and we open back up and people get back to living and having fun.
You're spot on, Mayor. And I felt like I uplifted Chief Dickerson at the work session on Tuesday, but you're exactly right. Those folks are answering every 911 call and keeping us safe. And they answer a lot of calls where they might be second due. I mean, they're everywhere, and they go, and they're endangered potentially in some, you know, a lot of the time. So you're exactly right. Thanks for pointing that out.
My sense is there's no consensus for making any changes to the budget. Does anyone, I'll make a last offer if anybody wants to make a recommendation and see if their peers would support it, or we're not voting on anything, but if there are any changes that you want to see to this budget, this is the time to discuss it and solicit support. And my expectation would be is if we don't have any meaningful changes, I also want to know your thoughts on voting on it tonight or delaying it to the 21st. And I would just suggest that because there are so many significant changes taking place, and most of them were rolled out on Tuesday the 5th, which did not make the Wednesday the 6th News Gazette, nor the timing to be in the Rockbridge Advocate. This would give an opportunity, at least for it to be in the News Gazette and perhaps be disseminated in other venues so that people could have an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'd like to know from Jake and Gary, does that present any kind of problem if we wait 2 weeks to approve the budget?
Other than the school issue, which was addressed tonight, and it seems that the 21st would be appropriate for going ahead with a school budget adoption, I don't see any reason why we couldn't wait until the 21st.
The only observation I would make beyond that would be it really puts the pressure on council on the night of the 21st. If you can't muster the votes to pass the budget that night, you've got no backup plan.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose you could always approve only the school budget, not the rest of the budget, but I don't, in all honesty, see how we could expect city council to adopt a school budget if you aren't prepared to adopt an overall budget.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with adopting it tonight, except that, you know, everything does change. It's been changing so rapidly. If there's not a problem to delay, in some ways, I don't see why not.
I'm confident that we will be okay at our next meeting on the 21st if we did wait. I always take the approach, if it takes a little bit of time, you know, to get it out there, to get things right. And reason that, you know, a couple minutes ago, I pointed out a few things that are in this budget that are not in this budget. I do have the concern that our friends and neighbors may not know that. And I would not want to, in this time, not give them a chance to share their concerns or ask their questions prior to adopting it. It may not change my opinion, but in our community, in the interest of transparency, I think you've made a good point, Mayor Friedman, that the 2 weeks may serve to share what's in this budget. And I, for one, can explain the budget. I can, you know, explain my position, but doing it after the fact is sometimes a little bit more difficult. So I would be okay with waiting if it's not, if it's legal and if it doesn't negatively impact Gary and Jim and Jake. I feel like last year we waited. We had it scheduled to adopt on a certain night, and we did wait last year. And I don't think there was a harm any done, you know, last year when we did that.
We certainly are living in unique times and unique solutions prevail. So, but I welcome other council members' observations or preferences. And I certainly respect Gary's observation. We back ourselves into a corner needing to adopt the CIP, the school budget, as well as the general budget.
I would be okay with waiting as well. I feel like also that gives us a little more notice to the outside agencies if we do choose, you know, not to fund those this year. At least they will have an opportunity to absorb that news rather than find out after the fact. So.
Yeah, this budget has been a moving target for a long time now, and things still could change again. So we need to definitely be ready by the 21st. But I'm not sure that we're that confident to do that tonight. So the 21st gives us more time to be more self-assured that this is the route we've got to go.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander.
Mr. Mayor, if I may,
Yes, sir.
I'm very comfortable with council adopting in 2 weeks. I have no problems with that. I also believe you should strongly consider that you have an opportunity to look this over again in the fall. It's not saying that whatever's not included today or tonight or ultimately adopted on the 21st cannot be reconsidered, because we all do know that there's a lot of uncertainty. And I plan on and will prepare to bring it back to you, because if there's any opportunity to restore any of these things, you need to know that, and the public needs to know, the community needs to know that we have the funding there. Flip side is, if it gets worse, then we all need to know we have to work harder. So I'm planning to bring it back, and I just wouldn't hesitate to have you think that passing it on the 21st and leaving something out means it's irreparably gone. That's the only thing. I think we have the opportunity, you have the opportunity to say, Jim, put it back in 1st of December. And some things can work well going back in then, and some, probably like the school resource officer, won't. But many things can be redeemed.
Thank you, Jim. Council members have any other topics or issues they want to discuss in the few minutes we have left? Hearing none, we'll hope that Mother's Day will bring a cure to the virus, and the budget won't be quite as ambiguous. And we count on the good folks, the good old USA, to lead us forward to a prosperous future, as it were. Hearing nothing else, last call. I would have us adjourned at 7:48. Thank you, Janie. And we will stand adjourned until our 8 o'clock meeting, and beginning in 12 minutes. Thank you all. I have 7:58, so this is your 2-minute warning. We'll begin in 2 minutes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the appointed hour of 8 o'clock. Welcome to the Lexington City Council Zoom meeting in a time of emergency. And thank you all for being here. The first item on the agenda after the call to order is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you all will stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Doug, I have a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Next item on the agenda is public hearings. The first is public hearing on ordinance 2020-03, an ordinance to waive penalties and interest on unpaid taxes. I would like to open the public hearing. And on this, I'm not aware of anyone that submitted any comments. And we'll close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration.
I move to approve ordinance 2020-03, an ordinance to waive penalties and interest on unpaid taxes for prepared food and lodging from March 1st, 2020 through May 31st, 2020.
Second.
Have a motion, Chuck, with the second. Thank you very much. Any discussion?
I guess some questions. This is all. Let me get to the ordinance. So we are waiving penalties and interest for food and lodging taxes for March, April, and May. And that late taxes are due on the 31st of May. Is that what I'm reading here? And not, what day of the month are the usual food and lodging taxes due? Is it on the 20th, similar to state sales tax?
Gary, I might have to defer to you on that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact due date. It must be somewhere in the range of the 20th through the 25th. I normally see most all of the taxes for food and lodging paid by the 25th, but I don't know precisely what the due date is. I wish we had the Commissioner of Revenue here to answer that question for us. But it must be in that approximate time range.
So is this ordinance saying that, I guess it's not specifying.
Chuck, I would offer up that the idea is that all the businesses will still need to file their taxes. They don't really have to pay them at that time. And if they don't, they will not be charged a penalty or interest. And then I'm not sure the exact date, and we can confirm with Jared. The expectation is beginning in June, the taxes will all need to be paid in full.
Oh, okay. I'm understanding that part. It's just that I'm not sure if we need clarification that those late taxes are due in June. Is that a fair question? I'm just.
Yeah, and I think it's a question for Jared.
Yeah, it's just a question of, suppose what you're reading into it, they are due on the 20th of the month, and that would be the idea. Of course, the expectation is that ideally everyone's been paying them as required, but that would be the idea, is if they haven't been paid by any of them, any of the 3 months hasn't been paid by June 20th, then the penalties and interest on that amount, whatever amount is owing, begins to accrue as of June 20th.
Okay, well, it says all penalties and interest accessible as provided, yada, yada, shall be suspended and waived for the period March 1 through May 31st. I'm seeing the waiving, but I'm not seeing
When to pay it back.
the collecting.
Well, if I may, if you look at section 3, as I read that, it says nothing in this ordinance should be read as allowing a waiver of payment of any tax imposed. All such taxes are due and payable as directed by the relevant sections of Lexington Code. Penalties and interest on any unpaid taxes will begin to accrue starting on June 1st, 2020. So you may not pay March, April, or May, and you can do so without penalty. But after June 1st, those taxes are still due, and there will be a penalty and interest.
And of course, it's also just worth noting, since this idea was originally floated back in the middle of March, that at that time, I think it was explained to us, of course, that technically these taxes are not paid by the businesses, they are paid by the customers. The customers pay the taxes, and it's the businesses that essentially hold on to the taxes that the customers pay until they're required to remit them to the city. So they're intended to go from the customer into a holding account, I guess, and then to the city. And so that's the responsibility of the business, to hold the taxes the customer pays and then give it to the city. So just for those following along at home, that was something that was very well, it was explained to us by our commissioner of the revenue and our city manager. This was back in March that was shared with us.
And to that end, the city is providing a no interest loan of collected taxes that will be presumably used for a different purpose than what they are designated. I on principle have a problem with that. And the follow-up question to that is, if by the end of May 31st, the food or lodging business that has outstanding tax liability goes out of business, who is ultimately liable for the unpaid taxes?
The business owner.
So if it's corporation and they dissolve the corporation, the principals of the corporation are ultimately held liable?
suppose in that respect, then the city would become a creditor of the entity, and could pursue whatever remedy as part of the dissolution that the other creditors are pursuing.
Okay, I'm just trying to get as much information on this. I know other localities around are taking similar steps to help their downtown food and lodging businesses, as much as the state has provided some relief in sales tax reporting and paying delays. I'm just trying to provide some clarification for myself and to those listening and watching, what in fact what we're really doing.
I think that's a good point, because again, not to belabor it, but Karen noted that the taxes are held in trust and that this business cannot legally do anything with those funds other than hold on to them and then remit them to the. And again, that's coming from our Commissioner of the Revenue. Just worth noting.
Is it safe to assume that if they have not been doing much or any business during March, April, and May, that there would not be much to collect?
I think that's a fair assumption.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion or other questions that council members have?
So worst case scenario, we become a creditor, and if something happens and the taxes are not remitted to the city because the business folded, we get in line and we're a creditor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I suppose it depends on if worst case is that going through that process or just waiving those taxes and considering them uncollectible. Obviously, that would depend on the amount and the likelihood of collecting anything. But that, yes, those are the two worst options. Are we become a creditor and try to claw back something in the dissolution process, or we just agree to waive and not pursue whatever tax would have been owed. But again, that would only be part of, a complete dissolution. That's not something, I don't think anyone's considering not collecting these taxes for a going concern.
If I may note, of course, businesses in the best of times do go out of business and they don't always pay their tax or other liabilities. And we're left in a similar circumstance. The intent of this ordinance before you, as I understand, was to buffer or provide some support for businesses who were just like us, very surprised that within a period of a few short weeks, the economy came to a standstill. The best managed businesses in those situations, just like we are adjusting, have to adjust. So it was a chance to give them room to adjust, assuming they're going to do what is appropriate and proper and pay those taxes, and they're segregated away somewhere, but they have to take a couple deep breaths and take a look around. If we lose one or two, we could lose one or two when business is booming.
And going back to the beginning of the conversation, it looks like item number 3, penalties and interest on any unpaid taxes will begin to accrue starting June 1st. So if they don't want, or if the businesses don't want any penalties or interest to accrue, period, those penalties and interest need to be paid by June 1st. Is that accurate?
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think considering that the May taxes wouldn't be due until June 20th, in the absence of any emergency, it may make sense to amend this proposed ordinance and say penalties and interest on any unpaid taxes will begin to accrue starting on June 20th, 2020.
I think that's a good idea, just so no one gets surprised. I guess that's the only question that rose to the surface as to making sure we're all doing what we think the intent of this ordinance is doing. So I don't know how I don't know whoever made the motion to.
Made the motion. Yeah, so I accept your amendment to change, I guess it's not actually in the motion, but to accept your amendment to change the motion to approve the ordinance as amended.
Could I make a comment, please? I
Certainly.
believe the code or the ordinance as written in section 3, sentence 2 states all such taxes are due and payable as directed by the relevant sections of the Lexington Code. So the May tax, according to the Lexington Code, is not due until June 20. So there would be no penalty and interest June 1st on that portion of the tax. Is that true, Jared?
For the May, correct.
Right.
But, and the idea was to give basically the holiday until May 31st.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, you know, we obviously have to account for March and April.
Correct. If you wanted the whole month of May included without tax or penalty or interest, then the June 20 date would probably be more appropriate.
Yeah, I think that the second sentence of paragraph 3, all such taxes are due and payable, that's essentially just emphasizing that the tax itself is due and payable, and the expectation was that that would still be paid. Then the penalties and interest on any unpaid taxes, I think that's the way to go, is to keep that amendment as June 20th and keep everything else the same.
Okay.
I think that will achieve what we are attempting to provide.
So we have a motion and a second and a recommended amendment, an accepted amendment. Do we need to vote on the amendment and then vote on the motion?
Was I understand the change motion was to approve the ordinance with the amendment as stated. So it would just be a vote on the one motion.
Okay. Everybody clear on that?
Yeah.
Any other questions or concerns? Hearing none, we make a roll call vote. Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Next item on the agenda is public hearing for ordinance 2020-04, an ordinance to repeal city code sections requiring registration and inspection of rental dwelling units. We did receive communications from 3 different individuals, and for clarity, I want to read these into the record as suggested by the city attorney. So if you will indulge. From John Ellisted, 412 Confederate Circle, writes, Mayor and City Council, I would like to comment on the proposal to delete the city's rental inspection ordinance. While I understand that this program was effectively eliminated 4 or 5 years ago when the staff position assigned to enforce this ordinance was eliminated, I had hoped that the program would be continued, even if in a reduced manner. Sadly, the city manager informs me that it has not. Given this situation, I understand the desire to remove the enabling legislation, especially since it does not seem feasible in light of the COVID-19 economic downturn that the city will have the funds to hire a person to implement such a program in the near future. However, I would like to strongly recommend that the city council and city manager keep the inspections of the numerous rental properties within the city high on your list of programs that should resume when the economy rebounds. Let me provide a little bit of history as to the initiation of this program. In the late 1980s, the city created the Threshold Housing Commission and obtained numerous community development block grants for the purpose of rehabilitating much of the substandard owner-occupied housing stock within the city. This program was run through the Department of Planning and Community Development under the able leadership of Bill Blotter. 2 additional staff were hired, 1 to handle the applications and paperwork needed to initiate this program, and 1 to perform the work write-ups for each property and inspect the work performed. Over approximately 12 years, the city renovated over 100 houses in the Green Hill, Diamond Hill, and Centerville areas of the city. In addition, the city partnered with Habitat for Humanity to construct and add, a number of other low-income houses. This program was a rousing success and helped to transform those areas of the city. When this program was coming to its natural conclusion, the city looked to improve the condition of the rental properties, which could not be included in the previous program. We had received many inquiries and complaints about the condition of some of the rental properties, but had little legal authority to do much about them. The response of the city was to adopt the rental inspection ordinance. One of the staff from the housing rehab program was retained to perform this function. While I'll be the first to admit that the program did not run as smoothly as we had hoped and was far more complex and time-consuming than anticipated, there were many very positive outcomes from this effort. I remember reading some of the inspection reports and actually walking through some units myself, and I can tell you there were some abominable living situations in our community. I will not take a position as to the fault for such conditions. Sometimes it was the tenants who created these conditions, and sometimes it was the landlords or management companies which allowed them to exist. I can, however, say that there was a significant need for such a program in Lexington. I've been out of the picture for many years now and cannot say if these problems still exist or how many substandard units there might be. I seriously doubt that the city has any idea either, since the program has been dormant for many years now. This program was the logical continuation of the city's commitment to housing in our community and had widespread support from the council and threshold. It is disappointing to see that this commitment has waned over the years. The city still has an extremely large number of rental properties, with most being for individuals with lesser incomes. Just as soon as your finances stabilize, I would encourage you to readopt this program and recommit the city to ensuring adequate living conditions for our citizens who rent. Thank you. The next item is from Ben Grigsby. And I don't have his address, but I know it's Lee Avenue. Good afternoon. Post reading the News Gazette notice regarding the possible repealing of the city's ordinance regarding rental property inspections and a brief call with Arnie Glazer yesterday afternoon, I'd like to share a few thoughts for City Council's consideration. These comments are based on 2 different perspectives: experiences as the parent of a former student renter and also as an owner of residential rental properties in the city of Lexington. They also incorporate budgetary realities and the fact that the rental inspection program has been morbid in recent years. To begin, as a landlord in its active period, I found the inspection program to be a very useful partnership to ensure minimum safety standards in rental housing. While not protecting against all material aspects of, say, fire hazards, smoking in bed being a top risk, the program was a good checkpoint for basic repairs, consistent with the framework of a CO in a new construction. It was not onerous in my experience, and in fact added value to the landlord when obtaining insurance discounts. Budgets and structure aside, I feel that a reinstated program would be a good thing for Lexington, both tenants and property owners. As the parent of a student renter several years ago, I had the dubious pleasure of visiting a diverse set of local student rental houses. While there were properties that were quite well maintained, some clearly were out of code with fire danger, especially egress, faulty or absent alarms, etc., mold, etc. The rental inspection program was and could be again a sound mechanism to identify and encourage remedy of these deficiencies, which unaddressed raise the risk of harm. All this said, in recent times, even more so today, the funding of this program has been and is likely to remain a second-tier priority. And doing it in a half-baked way, inefficient and cumbersome to landlords and agents, would be counterproductive in my view. Therefore, any renewed inspection program would require capacity for a dedicated FTE to be effective, operating in parallel to the core duties of the city's building inspection function. There also is a conundrum for council to consider in respect to maintaining the ordinance versus its repeal. Namely, does the city increase its liability by having a non-operating program on its books more than eliminating a program only for there to be a disaster shortly thereafter. Bottom line, given the repeal and possible later reinstituting an inspection program would require exhaustive public hearings, I'd opt for keeping the ordinance on the books with a formal and public suspension of what was/is a well-intended and public safety positive ordinance for the city, if so allowed by state requirements and our insurers. As a citizen and landlord, I believe this is to be a good regulation for public safety, one to be reinstated once budgets so allow, as long as it's not unduly burdensome on the property owners and management companies. I hope these thoughts might add to your discussions. Respectfully, B.C. Grigsby. And lastly, received from Lynn Alexander, to whom it may concern. I read in the News Gazette of the items of this evening's hearing and am writing to state my opinion regarding ordinance 2020-04. It surprises me to hear that the city would consider ending the registration and inspection of rental dwelling units. Maybe I'm reading this incorrectly and this is not the issue under debate. If this is indeed the conversation, the idea that there is no accountability for rental dwellings is baffling. I've seen renters with landlords that allow the unit to fall apart due to the owner not wanting to put in the expense for upkeep. On the other side, I've seen renters who do not take care of the space, and thus it again falls apart and becomes unsafe and loses value. When no accountability is present for either party, everyone loses: landlord, renter, neighborhood, and the larger community. I request that accountability stay in place and for the codes to remain. Thank you for taking the time to read and listen to my comments. Again, Lynn Alexander. Those being the comments, I will close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration.
I move to approve ordinance 2020-04, an ordinance to repeal city code sections requiring registration and inspection of rental dwelling units and repeal the registration and inspection of rental dwelling units.
Second.
Thank you, Dennis, for the second. Leslie on the motion. Any discussion?
We talked about this briefly in Planning Commission when we were discussing the comprehensive plan, and Arnie, correct me if I'm wrong. We did note that we don't have that the program is not running right now, but that we did want to include a statement in the comp plan. I think a goal that we should have it in the future was my recollection. I don't know if you want to correct that, Arnie. And I think that's the right place to keep it, to remind us that when we're able to, we do want to reinstitute that program.
When I read the ordinance earlier today, I had a mild panic attack under the whereas the city of Lexington will no longer inspect rental dwelling units. And on the surface, that gave me a great deal of heartburn that we won't inspect. And consulted with the city attorney and also asked Jim to chime in. If you add the word investigate, there will still be the opportunity, and with many of the ordinances we have on the books in the city of Lexington, it's complaint driven. So if there's a renter who's concerned about the condition of their property, it's a precarious situation, whether we're inspecting or investigating a complaint. They do deserve the right to have adequate and appropriate housing. And the process that we're looking to go to, where we don't have the staff to actively go out and inspect, we do have staff that can respond to investigate complaints. And that would be the process going forward, which I personally can stomach, given the fact that we don't have the assets to fund it.
I'm glad we received public comment on this. You know, obviously we're also dealing with the budget and we haven't had much public comment on that. This is an important thing. A lot of folks are affected by renting, as Ben Grigsby shared as both a renter or a landlord. I think the mayor is exactly right, though, that a renter that feels that they are living in substandard a substandard environment has recourse of contacting the city. They have recourse of contacting the Department of Health. There's certain avenues that they can follow up on, and so I agree with the mayor. That's the only way I can really stomach this. There is still opportunity to raise an issue if someone feels that they have one.
The problem with this is if it's going to be complaint driven, you have people who are fearful of making a complaint because of the fear of retaliation from the landlord. And there are some horrible things that landlords do to retaliate with their tenants. And I mean, I see some things here with people who come in to apply for housing here who talk about their living conditions where they are residing, and there are still issues. And the main thing they will tell you is, I'd rather just go find someplace else to go rather than complain. One of the things that is really important is if the city public works knows about things, when they do water meter checks and find out about the possibility of leaks or whatever, and people are paying $300 or $400 water bills, and there are only 3 people in the household or 2 people, then something is wrong. But it would depend on Public Works to take that up with other departments within the city to help that individual household. But I really have concerns about making this something that's strictly complaint driven, because you're not going to have many people complain. They would live with the situation or try their best to get out.
I think the citizens, the comments that were just read were good comments and very valid. This makes me really concerned. Just doesn't sit well with me, honestly. Marilyn had just made some good points about the complaint driven. I understand there's budget issues, but taking it off, bringing it back will be harder. I just don't feel like it's, I don't know. I just, it just doesn't sit well with me. So, and I hear, Frank, what you're saying, but the codes, I know there are codes out there that they can enforce, but I think rental properties in some neighborhoods are a real problem. And I would just feel more comfortable an ordinance be in place, even though we're not enforcing it right now, but taking it out, and then it's just going to go away. And it might get back to where there are a lot of complaints and it's pretty bad, and then we have to put it back in. I just feel better if we still have it. So that's just my opinion.
Is there some legal ramification behind it if we do still have it on the books and we're not using it?
Yes, this is Jared. That's really what's driving the repeal. It's my understanding that functionally this program has not been in effect, that it hasn't been effectively in place for a number of years. And that's a concern to me, because it clearly states that the city will be doing these things. And if the city is not doing these things, that's a problem just in and of itself. And then, of course, the worst case is if something does happen, and it turns out that the city was supposed to be inspecting, whatever building it was where this problem occurred, and they haven't been doing that, then I think that it's an affirmative liability to the city that we were not doing the inspection program as required under our own ordinances. So that's why it's been my suggestion to either certainly understand all of the concerns, but we either need to have it on the books and do it according to how it's written, or not have it at all.
Jared, can I ask, Mr. Grigsby's suggestion that we suspend it but leave it on the books, is there any mechanism to do that? Like to say that basically amend it so that we're saying there's a moratorium on it and it won't be effective until January of 2022 or 2023 or something like that. So at least it's still on the books. And if we did it that way, would it be easier then to bring it back as opposed to completely removing it now and then later trying to put it back in de novo?
Or that it's pending restructuring?
Well, I think regardless, I think certainly the cleanest way is to repeal it. And from a legal perspective, I don't see a huge hurdle to bringing it back. It's essentially what we're doing tonight, having a public hearing and voting on it at a meeting. From the legal side, it's more the practical side of sort of hiring someone, ramping up the organization to actually be able to do that. So that would be the hurdle, not the process of putting it back on the books. And I think keeping it on there with a moratorium is just
well, if you're saying it wouldn't take any additional time or effort to bring it back, brand new rather than reinstating it, I kind of like Leslie's idea of having it in the plan so that we know that it's out there as a goal. I mean, clearly we can't do this right now, so I guess.
Yes, I agree that would be the preferred way to do it. Is certainly not forget that this is a tool that we have potentially at our disposal, but repealing it so we're not, so it's clear that we're not telling anyone at any time that we're doing this program when we're not is the way to go. And again, like I say, to bring it back, all we need to do, just like any other ordinances or ordinance, is to advertise it, have a public hearing, and then vote on it.
And I think being in the comprehensive plan as a goal, it makes it more visible and keeps the idea in front of people.
I would argue that I understand the importance and the of leaving it in the comp plan, but I can't tell you how many people pick up the comp plan and read it through and would identify this this goal as something that's I don't want to say, well, that it is substantive. The challenge I have with the repeal is, that we have perception and reality. If we repeal an ordinance inspecting dwelling units, I think that sends a very conflicting signal to the people that live here versus somehow suspending it like Dennis suggests. I would feel more comfortable working through this and determining what our best options are in 2 weeks than trying to vote on this evening.
We haven't been doing this for at least 4 years now.
I know that. I understand that. I've been part of conversations that have included getting the program back up and running for the very reasons that we seem to be repealing it. I'm worried about the message that gets sent if we do this. Legalese and all that, I understand. I get it. But pulling the plug on this is going to be, I don't think, the best thing to do.
But I mean, I do think it's important that we be honest with our constituents that we haven't been doing this, that we can't do this right now. I think it would be better to reflect that in pulling it. So I would be okay with going forward and voting on that.
I just want to say we were in good financial shape 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and we didn't make the commitment to do this, I guess. I understand now we have some budget constraints, but I guess it just bottom line is we can't do it half-assed. We have to or either we're committed to this or we're not. And so I just think it's an important function of the city, but it's a shame that, you know, somehow it got put, just didn't really, wasn't very active in.
When the department lost staff, they did some restructuring, and the function was replaced with the fire marshal, who was doing inspections and for fire inspections, and that included some rental inspections as well. And it just kind of fizzled out. I don't know why. But I think it's important that the city is represented, saying that we are in support of minimum, at least minimum housing standards. And the program was really concentrating on the downtown because of the connectivity of all the buildings and what was going on the second floor with apartments. And I understand that there were landlords that were putting people, you know, 3 and 4 people in a bedroom, or they had them in a room that might have been used for something else to sleep in. And the room didn't even have a means of egress in case of a fire. Those kinds of things were discovered, lots and lots of fire hazards. And I don't know if those situations still exist, but then we have not only the downtown, we have an entire city that is full of rentals, in some sections of the city, many more so than others. And as the longer you let something go, the longer people will get away with things that they should not be. I don't know the answer to this with this current budget situation. I don't know the answer about how to keep this on the books or not keep this on the books. But I think it, like some others have said, this really sends a message if you take it away and you don't have something ready to start discussing to put in its place. If we had a date that we said, okay, we're going to have a work session on such and such date to start the conversations again about establishing a new program, some kind of way, then that too will send a better message than just repealing it and just forgetting about it and let it sit in a comp plan for another 7 or 10 years.
I think one of the problems we had in the past with enforcing the ordinance was just the logistics of getting all the people to the property that needed to be there all at the same time. Between the turnover we've had in planning, in the city manager's office, in other departments, just trying to connect all the dots that needed to get connected to make this happen, became it didn't become a low priority, but it didn't. There were just other fires that had to get put out. Pardon the language, but that was a big part of the problem, if I recall correctly. And I don't know how easily those problems can be corrected now that we have a new city manager in the office. Now that some things need to be stabilized, some things that seem to be stabilizing, regardless of what COVID is doing. Maybe this discussion will prompt the parties that are in charge to re-examine what needs to happen to either make it a possibility or over the next 2 weeks determine, no, it is not possible to do this at this time. And then have a more informed opportunity to discuss whether or not to repeal the ordinance.
And we are the parties in charge, of legislating whether we're going to have this or not and putting the resources towards it. And we just did our budget. We don't have the resources.
Mr. Mayor, may I weigh in on this Gary Swink? I'm
Yes,
not going to weigh in on either side of the issue, but I believe I can bring a little historic perspective. I've been with the city nearly 8 years. And I remember even in that first year, and I overlapped 2 years with John Ellistat. I remember discussions, city council, even in that time frame, asking that the rental inspection program be reinstituted. I overlapped probably 2.5 years with Joe Neal, who is the individual that I believe John Ellistat's referring to that was supposed to be doing rental inspections. I know for a fact that she quite clearly told me that she hadn't done any rental inspections for quite a number of years prior to her leaving. It was at Camille Miller's urging and insistence when Noah came on board that he made an attempt to try to get the program reinstated. And as someone earlier alluded to, it was initially a joint effort between Trent Roberts, the fire marshal, and Steve Paulk as the building inspector. And prior to Ellie, and I believe her last name was Grady, leaving the planning department, her role was to be to help coordinate and try to get all the players together at the right site at the right time. So when I'm hearing that this program's been dormant for 3 or 4 years, I know that it's been much longer than that. So I just wanted to at least state the historic perspective best that I can recall it. Thank you.
I mean, we have people who live in the city who don't have heat in the winter and they're trying to use space heaters. People who have raw sewage coming out of the ground. People who, when it rains, it's raining in the house just as much as it's raining outside. And I do know this, but they are in homes that are owned by the people that are residing in them. This is rental inspection. So I am really concerned that if homeowners are having to resort to this, I would imagine that there are rental properties in the area that could be just as bad or worse. I mean, the home-owned properties I am very aware of, 2 that I can point to right now.
Can I ask you, you said that there would still be some revenue for, investigations if a complaint was brought to the city about the habitability of a location. That doesn't have to be the tenant making that initial complaint, right? I mean, anybody theoretically, the social workers, the police, I mean, does it have to be either the landlord or the tenant making the complaint and requesting the investigation?
No, it could be anyone, for the fire marshal to go out or the building inspector.
Or a neighbor.
No, well, I'm saying that the complaints would go to the fire marshal or the building inspector. It could be anyone.
Gotcha.
The reason why I was asking is Marilyn makes a good point there. I'm sure there are tenants who are afraid for, retaliation. I'm just wondering if that is the only avenue for the filing of a complaint, and apparently, it's not. So
Any of the problems are not visible. So I guess I'm concerned about some of the problems that are safety issues that are inside that are not visible to neighbors. Again, I think that's a concern.
I don't think anybody has a concern or has a question whether or not there are properties out there that are not in great shape. The fact of the matter, Brenda's the one who brought this, I think left it as one of the items for Jim to address. We have on our books that we are making people register and we are going out and inspecting these on a regular basis, and we're not doing it. If you want to find the money to put it in place, I think that's great. I would suggest that perhaps the motion could be modified to include, to repeal it, but also to put it at some point in time in the future on the calendar to revisit. I don't know if there's any problem with that or if the folks that made the motion have any desire to do that, but for advancing the discussion, make that observation. Jared, is there any problem with including something like that in the motion to bring back April of 2021 or 22?
No, but I think maybe the cleaner way to do it would be to have two motions, one to repeal and one to set a discussion on a future agenda.
Thank you.
If, Mr. Mayor, if I could add something,
Please.
the time to bring it up is when we're discussing the budget. I'd be very pleased to bring it up this time next year and say, here's what it'll cost to put a program in place.
Right.
I mean, I can't promise you or our residents any impacts of an ordinance of this nature if we don't have the staff and even the equipment to put it in place, the supplies. I mean, we've cut significantly in our budget. It's not there probably. And until we can recover, or until, if this is good for the entire community, we raise taxes because we're protecting the property values of the entire community. It's a rationale, perhaps. I just have to have the funding. And we have to have the funding. It's a budget issue.
Policy issue that's driven by funding, perhaps. Any other discussion on the motion that exists for approval of this ordinance? Hearing none, I'd make a call for the question. Ms. Hentz? You've got your mute on, Michelle.
So to recap, the motion is to repeal and then
It's just to repeal the ordinance.
Just the ordinance as presented.
Are we going to have another motion for discussion or to bring it up? Or
We
I
can.
like Jim's suggestion of wait for the budget next year, but
Yeah.
it could be a separate motion.
Okay. All right, well, I do have concerns about if we're not doing it and the legal issues. I guess I'll say and I hope we have another, we'll put it on the agenda.
Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
No.
Ms. Alexander.
No.
Motion approves 4-2 by my math.
So just to clarify, we could implement this program immediately. We can raise the revenue. And in my 6 years on council, I've never heard anyone go to the mat during any of the budget cycles actually to do it. I recall Camille pushing on it, but in each cycle, I've never heard it. And I didn't hear it in any of our work sessions leading up to tonight when we were scheduled to adopt the budget. So I think it was incredibly healthy to have this conversation tonight because we got 3 comments that brought a lot of people up to speed on this issue to where we have been and where we maybe will go. But under the guidance of legal counsel, we had no choice but to vote tonight the way that we did. If our attorney is saying we need to get it off the books, there's no other way except to expose all of the city to potential liability so.
Thank you for your comments, David. I would also note, John Elstead mentioned this started in the 1980s as a home improvement. Third-year housing moved on to Washington Lee, so there are fewer rental places. There's no doubt in my mind that our city would prosper from a rental inspection program, robust, because real estate is the lifeline of the city with real estate taxes. But to your point, we've had $1 million surpluses and we've not chosen to fund this particular program or move advanced on it. Some of that's because of transition, but the action taken tonight If there's a winning lottery ticket that someone contributes to the city next week, we can put it on, give our 2 weeks notice and vote on it in June and bring it back and fully fund it if you choose to. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing to review a request from Randy Walters with Rockbridge County Schools to amend a conditional use permit for the Maury River Middle School campus at 600 Waddell Street to add a ball field. I will open the public hearing, and I've received no communication. Consequently, I will close the public hearing and ask for council's consideration.
I move to approve the request from Randy Walters with the Rockbridge County Schools to amend a conditional use permit for the Maury River Middle School campus at 600 Waddell Street to add a ball field.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler, for a second, Leslie for the motion. Any discussion?
Just to clarify, since I was a part of helping to construct the Brubaker Annex a while back, which was a field with neighbors. I walked this property the other day, and I called and I had a chance to talk to Randy Walters, and I had a couple questions. He answered them all, and something that he immediately cleared up for me is the application. All the verbiage talks about a ball field. My mind immediately went to a baseball field or softball field, like a ball field, as opposed to a playing field. I kind of look at it differently. And so he quickly assured me that there is no backstop. This is not that kind of a baseball or a softball field. And of course, that was a hang up with some neighbors when we did the Brubaker Annex that abutted up against a residential neighborhood. So of course there's rock up in that area, but Randy answered all my questions. And so I makes great use of that space, and the community will benefit from it. So I'm thrilled that they're moving on that project.
There used to be soccer fields there, small ones for the younger kids, and that's basically what it'll be again, is a flat field. They have put a fence around the entire property, at least where it is adjacent to neighbors, so they won't have the same parking issues they used to have years ago when people would park in the neighborhood and walk over. And the minutes are included, as you can see, but the only comments we really got from the neighbors were concerns about dust. And we discussed that, and it was noted by Russ Orson, and he was going to take it back to Randy to just work with the neighbors on that.
It's not intended to be a dirt field, is it?
No, and then the dust is just from construction of moving the dirt, yeah.
Legal question. I am a part-time employee of Rockbridge County Schools. Does that put forward a conflict?
I don't think so, since, I'm assuming you don't have any sort of personal stake in the issue.
I don't, but similar problems have come up with playgrounds and things that the Lexington City Schools are trying to do. So just want to be clear on that.
Obviously, if you'd feel more comfortable just abstaining or recusing yourself from the vote, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. It's sort of more the perception problem than a strict legal problem.
I felt comfortable not recusing myself from the playground discussion, but was encouraged to, just for a little background.
Very good. Thank you, Jared. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, would ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Ayers.
Aye.
Ms. Hentz.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Janie's been exceedingly busy, as has council, and you have approval of minutes 7.1 through 7.7. Those were included in your package, and you had the opportunity to review them. Anybody have any observations or details that like changed? Leslie.
just an observation of look at our meeting on March 5th. Everything was good and and then a week later, it hit the fan. But no, the minutes themselves look very good, but wow, a lot has happened.
Indeed. There's no objection. We'll just accept approve the minutes as presented. I don't know that we have citizens' remarks that came in. Janie, can you affirm we have no citizen remarks?
You do not have any that came in. The only things that came in were the 3 that you've already read.
Terrific, thank you. Next item are reports and communications, Blue Ridge Resource Authority. Mr. Smith?
Authority will meet on Monday for a public hearing on the new tipping rates. Side note, the closure of the old cell is looking real good. The cap's looking really good. Everything's moving along to the board and director satisfaction. Nice. I guess some good news to share with everybody after the problems we had with the original contractor some time ago. So some good news to hear tonight. Thank you. Any questions?
Talking good trash. Thank you, Chuck. Main Street, Lexington.
No report.
Planning Commission.
Planning Commission, we met on Thursday, April 23rd, and we had several items of business. First, we had the Steel Lexington LLC. They had a site plan for us to review. They modified their previous site plan that we had already approved. And actually, all the changes were required by the Virginia Department of Housing, except that they moved or added a smoking area. And that was approved unanimously 7-0. And then we did have a request from the Marshall Museum, and that we deferred that, and we'll take that up at our next meeting. We also had an application from Maxmark Homes to amend the planned unit development zoning for Weatherburn subdivision located at Chamberlain Loop, and to do boundary line adjustments there as well. And those items were approved 7-0, and that'll come before council, I believe, at our next meeting. We had an application from June Patterson for a preliminary subdivision to adjust boundary lines at Hook Lane and Smith Street. And that was approved unanimously, and that'll come before council, I believe, at the next meeting. And one more preliminary subdivision to vacate lot lines for VMI, where they did the core physical training facility. Those were a bunch of different parcels, and they just want to make it one big parcel. And again, that was approved unanimously, and that'll come before council. We then discussed the comprehensive plan schedule, and at this point, we plan to receive the entire draft of the comprehensive plan tomorrow, and we'll review the first half next Thursday, and then at our second meeting in May, review the second half, and we plan to have public meetings in June, whether that's online or not, whether Planning Commission is online or not. And either way, we will still accept comments and have it videotaped. So hopefully it'll get more people engaged in that. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions for Leslie? Lots of fun activity on the Planning Commission. Chuck?
If you can refresh my memory, when did we start the comp plan review process? I'm just
Close to 2 years.
Good timeline on how long this has taken and how much further we have to go.
Yeah, I believe we started about 2 years ago, and we had a couple different Planning Commission members at that point, and we should, well, we'll have our public meeting in June. I don't think we'll approve anything by June, but at least we'll be to a point where we're just making minor modifications, and that can be done by staff.
And what is the state regulation on review frequency?
I think you're supposed to review it every 5 years.
5 years.
That's what I recall as well. So by the time we finish this, we'll have 2.5 years to sit on it and then rev the engine. Well, I guess is
This was a major modification too. When you review it every 5 years, and really we plan to review it, annually, not make changes to it, but this was a major rewrite of it.
You see,
Update, I should say.
My experience, the multiple years on council with city school board, by the time you're finishing and improving it, it's time to start on the next one. So it's a perpetual effort. Well pointed out, Chuck. Regional Tourism Board.
Yeah, the board won't meet again until May 20th, but I do have a couple of updates. First, the tourism staff has been working on a 3-phase marketing plan to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. And phase 1, which we're in now, began in March and is focused on providing information and resources through our website and social media to keep citizens and travelers safe. There's the We'll Be Waiting for You campaign, which features beautiful scenic visuals designed to be inspirational and invitational without being promotional or self-serving. There's also the hashtag Rockbridge in 15 seconds campaign, which some of you might have seen. They're short videos featuring nature sounds and the scenic beauty of Rockbridge landscapes. And there's the Rockbridge Together Outdoors Challenge, which is a weekly contest of posted photos of socially responsible outdoor activities. And another one, which I'm really keen on, is the hashtag Trails Less Traveled campaign, which is a collection of videos featuring lesser known hiking trails to discourage the overuse of the more popular trails in our area. And a couple that they're promoting under that campaign are Reservoir Hollow in BV and the Uncas Trail here in Lexington. Phase 2 of their response to COVID-19 is starting in May, and it aims to increase engagement with prospective visitors and begin slow re-entry into the market. And through this period, Regional Tourism will use its website and social media platforms to remind consumers to support local businesses still operating, as well as those that are temporarily closed, but also begin looking toward the future. And initiatives include the ongoing hashtag Takeout Tuesday campaign, which promotes local restaurants providing takeout service, and the It's Time to Dream campaign, which focuses on outdoor recreation activities and includes a call to action to order the 2020 Inspiration Guide. And finally, phase 3, which we're not quite in yet, but we're getting there, is Invite and Recovery, where Regional Tourism resumes inviting travelers to our area. The start date for that is obviously yet to be determined. Campaigns to fit this phase are still being worked out, but one will be postings and content focused on Share What You Love, which promotes family travel experiences and couples getaways. I got a couple of regional collaborations to mention. First, tourism coordinated and paid for a joint jurisdictional video called Together We Can Keep Our Community Strong, supporting local businesses during the COVID-19 emergency. And partners on that project included tourism, the County Office of Community Development, cities of BV and Lexington, Main Street Lexington, the local Chamber of Commerce, and the Shenandoah Valley Partnership. And almost finished here, guys, a lot going on. Regional Tourism also continues to promote Main Street Lexington's gift certificate program and has sold over $1,000 worth of gift certificates since the visitor center closed on March 13th. Tourism has been reaching out to local hotels to gauge business and can report that most hotels in the area remain open with an average occupancy rate of between 15 and 30%. And I'll close with a bit of good news. Natural Bridge State Park reports that revenues for the first weekend in May actually exceeded those for the same weekend in May 2019. And even though the main building's closed, you can still go down to the bridge and there's a ticket booth at the bottom of the hill when you get down there. So to manage crowds, the park has instituted a 75-car limit for their parking lot, and another local attraction that remains open, Virginia Safari Park, has experienced record high visitation numbers, and they're now looking to institute an online ticket sales system to help manage crowds. In fact, this past weekend, traffic to the park was apparently backed up on Route 11 and Interstate 81. So clearly, there are some people who are looking for things to do. So that's good news. So. And that's it.
I can relate to that. We went to St. Mary's Wilderness on Saturday, and there were cars backed, probably quarter mile, half mile back up the road from the parking area. So we just turned around and went somewhere else. But it is good to see people getting out and enjoying our area.
A lot of natural beauty to experience and enjoy, to be sure. Rockbridge Area Department of Social Services, Ms. Hens.
I have no report. We'll be meeting the third Wednesday of the month.
Terrific. Thank you, Michelle. Raro.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Stickler. Threshold, Ms. Alexander.
No report, but we'll be meeting on the 19th.
Terrific. We all be meeting virtually?
Yes, we're going to Zoom our meeting.
You go. Doesn't matter how long you've been at it, you can still learn new tricks, right?
Right.
Good work. Good work. Thank you. I don't have anything from my report other than for everyone listening, and I hope our media will pick up. A huge thank you to the businesses in our community, and specifically the Chamber of Commerce. The virtual cash mobs have been a great success. If you didn't hit Shando Attic yesterday, shame on you. You can still go tomorrow. But that was a huge success and a very positive circumstance for a relatively new business owner. I was out on the street sidewalks yesterday and saw Debbie making frequent deliveries to cars of people driving by. We're all doing things in a new way and different circumstances than we ever probably could have imagined. And I just applaud the creativity of the restaurants, and I won't name all the businesses, but everybody doing a great job to be accommodating to their customers. And so a huge thanks to the Chamber and the entire community, business and retail and citizens, for their efforts to pivot and practice positive plans as we move through this COVID-19 time. City Manager, your report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of items of significance, and one is that we are anticipating and planning on loosening of the restrictions that are in place right now and reopening city facilities. So we're looking at the things that we need to do to try and assure the safety of our employees and staff, and also assure the safety of the public. We've recently put up some plexiglass screens in the Commissioners of Revenue's office, the Treasurer's office, planning to do so in the Registrar's office. Also reviewing our other office facilities where we have significant public contact to see if there's anything we can do in those areas as well. Of course, part of that would be bringing staff back on 5 days a week during the regular business hours. We have staggered the staff now during the days of the week and hours of the day, so there's not as many of us here. So we may also make some changes in the traffic patterns, if you will, or the setup in our offices. Robbie Bailey is working with our safety committee on the supplies we will need and the types of opportunities, again, that we might need to have for equipment and supplies in the office, both for staff and for customers. We will, again, be working with the staff to see what concerns they have, and then planning on what types of things we can provide for customers to assure them safety when they come into the office. Maybe a station where they can pick up a mask if they do not have one. Ideas of that nature. The second thing that's important, I guess, or of interest, is the Shenandoah Valley Juvenile Center, which we're a member of. We are a very small member of. We have very few people, citizens, that take advantage of that service or need that service. But that entity is considering a one-time relief effort for the membership so that some of the accrued reserves would be given back to the members. Now, that's pretty important to Rockingham County, Harrisonburg, Augusta County, perhaps even Rockbridge County, who really will receive tens of thousands of dollars. Lexington, on the other hand, and this is based on the percentage of citizens in the facility, the percentage we've used it over the years, I think we would get back about $460. It's not worth much to us. The effort, though, on behalf of those other entities, I guess, is pretty significant. So that's being considered. You probably read or heard there are 3 new COVID cases this last week in Lexington associated with employers, several employers in the community. No other spread that I'm aware of, but that's a recent turnaround. We'd had 3 very early, and those folks had all recovered, and there was no transmission in the community, but 3 employees of different employers here in the community have come down with the COVID virus, been diagnosed. Speaking of gifts, the Rockbridge Area Genealogical Society recently dissolved, unfortunately, but they did gift the Miller's House Museum with some funds that they had remaining after they dissolved. So one entity was helping to look after another entity that cares about our community and cares about the history of our community. The farmers market, and talking to Brian Ross, is doing very well. He said they've had 14 to 15 vendors recently. They sell a lot of tomatoes, a lot of strawberries, and eggs there, among other things. So that's another piece of good news that perhaps sometimes we overlook, and a place for some of us to go out and look for some fresh, locally grown produce and agricultural items. And that's all I have for this evening, Mr. Mayor, council members.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions for the city manager? Very good. I would recognize the, went to the farmer's market yesterday, and it was very vibrant, and they had a lot of good product out there. So encourage people to take advantage of that and keep their 6 feet apart, but good stuff. Lots of good looking plants and herbs to plant in your yard so you can feed the deer and rabbits. We have item 13.2, adoption of the fiscal year 21 budget and capital improvement plan.
I move to postpone the adoption to our May 21st meeting.
Second.
Chuck, is that second? Motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
You know, oh, sorry. I thought David gave a good summary during our work session, just to alert people that we have cut recycling for next year. That's included in there in the budget, as well as cutting some funds to different agencies. And so please take a look at the budget. This gives the community another 2 weeks to comment on the budget.
Absolutely. And so we count on our friends in the media to get the word out. So thank you for that. Any other comments or questions?
And to that point, I mean, I think, you know, the pool not opening is another item that families will be wondering about, you know, so I just point that out.
Absolutely. Unique times require unique solutions. And no pool in the summer is a unique solution, to be sure. I'll offer a call for the question. Ms. Hentz?
Aye.
Mr. Ayers?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler?
Aye.
Ms. Strawn?
Aye.
Ms. Alexander?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. We will forward that to the May 21st meeting. City Attorney.
Just a brief report. The Supreme Court of Virginia yesterday signed an order stating that each individual jurisdiction courthouse, the judges can begin opening up the docket to non-emergency cases starting on May 18th. So I'm not sure at this point how Rockbridge and the Lexington courts are going to handle that process. Hopefully we'll have more specific information on the next meeting on the 21st, but that's just something to be aware of. Obviously, we have the suit involving the water tower property pending, so we will attempt to get that on the docket as soon as we can as things begin to get scheduled. So that's all I have in terms of a report. The only other issue is I suggest we readopt the emergency ordinance we adopted at our prior meeting to allow electronic meetings. If I can get my right, I'll go ahead and read the title so we don't have to read it twice. It would be a motion to readopt the emergency ordinance to effectuate temporary changes in certain deadlines and to modify public meeting and public hearing practices and procedures to address continuity of operations associated with pandemic disaster.
So moved.
Thank you, Chuck.
Second.
I'm going to give that one to Leslie. I'm not sure who there was. Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Mr. Ayers,
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Thumbs up for an aye. Ms. Strawn,
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler,
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
I think I got everybody.
Ms. Hen-
Did I miss you, Michelle?
Yeah, aye.
Michelle. Got distracted with the thumbs up there. I can't be in two places at once.
My Bob Lyra hat.
Yeah. Jared, just with the changes in the judges, who will be hearing the case on the water tower?
Should be Judge Russell.
Okay. And is he also the one that will be making the determination on when to open up and how and all that good stuff?
Yes, he will have the ultimate authority on how that process works.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's or any new business council members want to bring forward. I'm not aware of any.
I will ask a question for Jim. I guess as far once we start to reopen, our policy for our command center emergency management center seems to be follow the governor's orders. Is that do we plan as a city to take any extra precautions, or we will follow the direction of the governor? Is my question.
Well, we certainly will look at anything the governor's office has to recommend or commend as far as precautions, but we'll look at other sources as well and make those decisions based on what seems to be more appropriate for the city of Lexington. We won't disregard anything out there as far as precautions.
Thank you.
Are there any discussions about the parks and children playing on the equipment and when
There
that can happen?
We have not discussed that, but it has been an item that we know we have to deal with.
Okay.
And I'll be honest with you, similar to the situation at the swimming pool, how do you stop kids from tussling and poking each other and pushing and shoving? They're probably going to be out there. So try to warn people, try to ask them to take precautions, not to be too precocious as young people, and be too close physically. It maybe might be the best we can do. I don't know. I haven't resolved whether or not it makes any sense at all to try and say nobody can be on the playground for another 2 or 3 months. That might be just a losing proposition.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
And just want to alert everyone, there have been discussions and Jim's working with staff to talk about the best practices for when we get to the other side, when we open up, how long do we continue the emergency management process? We could extend longer than the governor, or we have that option if we would choose to. So all these things are being discussed, I think, by the senior management team, looking on our way forward as we progress. When Jim and I were meeting earlier today, one of the things we were talking about is how the budget was put together, as Leslie pointed out earlier, somewhat in January, February. And Gary went on vacation, and when he came back, ready to deliver the budget, and just as it was being delivered is when all proverbial hell broke loose and the world changed. And obviously our budget has changed dramatically. And it's been said before, and I know all of council feels strongly, we're very grateful for the time and commitment and your ability as staff to pivot and work with council to get what we feel is a reasonable and responsible budget going forward. Lots of things we'd like to do, but we're concerned the revenue is not going to be there, and planning for that has been no easy feat. So thank you all. And looking at the budget process, one of the things that I feel personally strongly about is the fact that financial ruin happens with companies going bankrupt, individuals going bankrupt, and things can happen from a financial standpoint. But wanted to close in sharing a quote from Robert Kennedy. The gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. So I leave you with that to ponder and reflect on as you go home, and please give your family our thanks. You don't have far to travel tonight to get home safely, but thank you to your families for allowing you to serve our community and for all the good work that you do. And anticipating there's nothing else to come before us, we will stand adjourned. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council.